Hi guys, welcome to 2022, and I thought that we could start off the year with a bang. So we are going to be doing part 1 out of 2 in my eyeshadow palette declutter. I am so overdue, and you will see that when I go through my palettes. I have a lot of really old palettes, well, old for me anyway. And I just have way too many. Like, I don't have room for all of this and I need to declutter. So it's going to be quite ruthless. I never counted up like how many palettes that I have, but there's a lot. If I had to guess, I would say probably close to 200 palettes or something like that. So yeah, a lot had to go, let's just put it that way. So I'm gonna keep this intro short and sweet, but if you are new here, hi, my name's Annette. I do mostly like colorful makeup. I use a lot of indie brands and I love eyeshadow. Eyeshadow is my true love. It's mostly what I do here on my channel, so that is why I have so many palettes. Brands like to send me palettes, which is great for me, but it does sometimes make me a little bit overwhelmed. So I just need to start the year off with a little bit more space. So if you are new to my channel and you want to see more of this, don't forget to subscribe. Let's jump into the declutter, but before that, just a short disclaimer. Welcome to my palettes. We are going to do this. Oh my god, I'm looking at this and I'm so overwhelmed. Like, my whole table is just covered in palettes. But I thought I would give you like a little bit of an overview. Like, this isn't even all of them. What you see in frame is maybe like a third of the palettes that I have. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna clean up a little bit. We're gonna go through one palette at a time. And yeah, let's just get into it. Now let's start with this little bunch of palettes here. These are palettes that I haven't used yet. So these are all new palettes that I've yet to make any content with. Not all of these are like new palettes in the makeup world, and I don't know if I'm going to make content with them, but I still wanted to show them to you because they are part of my collection. So this is one of the ZZ Cosmetics palettes, and I bought this palette after they had sent me some of their older ones, and I tried that one and I was so impressed by the quality that I ended up picking this one up as well on Amazon. And I think the color story is really, really fun, and I'm excited to give this a go and see if this is as good as the other one that I have in my collection. This one is the one called Fireworks 16 Colors Eyeshadow Palette, the Trustees of the British Museum. I don't see any like actual name on this, but I can't imagine them having more palettes that look exactly like this. So this is the outside if you for some reason want to pick this up. I wish that these Chinese brands would have like names more available on the palette so you could actually see what they're called. Anyway, next up is the Millennial Pinks palette from Melt Cosmetics. I got this in their December mystery box. I haven't used this yet, but I think this is really beautiful, so I'm definitely going to keep it. Next up, we have a palette from formerly called Muse Beauty, which is now called Kylab, and this is still in the packaging. This is the, I almost said reformulated Le Jardin palette, but this is like volume 2. The other one sold out really quickly and it was limited edition, so they ended up bringing back a new, I guess, improved, a little bit deeper version of the same palette. So I still haven't tried this, but I think this color story is really, really nice, and I really like Kylab as a brand, so I'm excited to dig into this. I just haven't had time yet. And if you can't tell, these palettes are in no particular order because when I store my palettes, I basically just shove them in a box and hope for the best. They're not very organized because I am not a very organized person. So we're just gonna go through this one palette at a time. Brands are gonna keep coming up, but that's okay. Next up, we have the new Ace Beauté reformulated Blossom, what is this called? Blossom Passion palette. So this is what the palette looks like. They did send me this after I reviewed their Tropical Vibes palette because I guess they liked my video and they wanted to send me some of their new reformulated palettes. So this is the one that they sent me along with another one that I will show you later, but I just haven't had time to play with this, but I think this is really, really pretty. And so far I've had a good time with the new reformulated palette, so I'm sure I'll have a good time with this as well, and I'm of course going to keep it. Now here's a palette that I'm so excited to do something with. This is the new palette from P. Louise, and I feel like I got mine kind of late. I've had this now for, I want to say, a week, and I simply just have not had time to film with it because, you know, the holidays and stuff like that. Let me try to get this open. So this is the Watch the Queen Conquer palette, and this is basically like a chess-inspired palette, and I don't know how I feel about this packaging. I'm so torn because I love it and hate it at the same time. So this is a two-sided palette. This is the first side of it. Beautiful, beautiful color story. I love the Worldy palette from P. Louise that you will see later. I think that the quality is so nice and I can't wait to dig into these. I feel like she's gonna have made some beautiful like dark purples, and I'm not gonna have any issues with them. And then you kind of flip the palette around like this and you open the other side. Oh, and look at this. Isn't this a perfect like fall color story? I love the tones in here. They are stunning. And then inside of the palette, which is like kind of stupid. Like, see, this is the thing. Like, it's like, it's not very practical. Inside is a chessboard. And like, the thing about this is that it doesn't lay flat. So like, if you actually wanted to use this as a chessboard, like, I just don't think you could. So like the idea of it is really cool, but I don't know if I necessarily love the execution, and I'm also not a chess player, so I don't know, but I'm still really excited about this palette. I think this is going to be amazing quality, and I cannot wait to do a video with this. Let's move into another random pile of palettes, because that's going to be the story of this video. It's all going to be very random. So the first palette on top here is from Menagerie, and this is their Killer Purr palette. I love Menagerie as a brand, and I'm definitely going to keep this palette. It is the most neutral palette that they've come out with, but I feel like it's sort of like an interesting neutral palette. It's not a boring neutral palette, so I'm definitely going to keep this. Like I said, I just love Menagerie as a brand, and I don't think I'll be decluttering anything from them. But yeah, this palette is really pretty, and if you haven't checked out this brand, I would highly recommend it because their quality is really, really good. Next up, we have a palette here from Makeup a Murder, and this is the Partner in Crime palette. I don't think this is available anymore. I think this was their Valentine's palette like 2 years ago, but here's what the color story looks like. It is a really, really fun palette, and I thought the quality was really nice, but I haven't reached for it since I filmed my video with it, I think. So I don't know if I want to keep it. I think pass this one along because I just don't see myself really reaching for this palette. It's quite monochromatic and it's really nice, and I just think that someone else is going to get more use out of it than me. I'm trying to be ruthless this time because I just have so many things, and my channel has grown since last time I decluttered, and I do get a lot of PR, which I'm super grateful for, but it also just means that I get a lot of stuff into my collection, and I need to stay on top of things because otherwise it just gets out of hand, and I want to make sure that I don't feel completely overwhelmed by the stuff that I have, and also because of how many new things I get into my collection, I just don't have time to play with the things that don't really make me super excited that I'm keeping just for the sake of keeping. You know what I mean? And I also I am not someone who does a lot of, I mean, I'll do some comparisons if people ask me, but I don't really pull for older palettes to like show compared to new ones, like dupe and stuff like that. I'm not a duper, so I am going to get rid of this. It hurts me a little bit because this is a really nice palette, and I did get this sent in PR. I'm not going to be able to say that about all the palettes in here, which ones I've gotten sent and which ones I haven't, but I would say that probably half of my collection or something like that is PR, so just keep that in mind. There are definitely some brands that like everything I've gotten I've had sent in PR, so I will make sure to mention that, but I just don't want to get repetitive and keep saying it for every single palette because there's just a lot of palettes here that I need to get through, so this one is going to get decluttered. Here is a palette from Alter Ego. This is the Artemy palette, which is a dupe for the Natasha Denona Metropolis palette. If I didn't have the Metropolis palette, maybe I would keep this, but I just feel like the Natasha Denona version of it is tenfold better. Like, it's just so much better. I do not like the cream to mattes in Alter Ego's palettes. I don't think they do them very well, so for that reason alone, there's so many of those in this palette that I just don't like them. They have some beautiful shimmers, and I don't think that the quality from Alter Ego is bad. It's just that when you have the original that's much better, this just doesn't stack up, so this one is gonna go. Here is a little palette from We Makeup, and I actually got sent this from one of you guys. This was a subscriber gift. They wanted me to try out the brand, and so I'm going to keep this. I've used it once and I thought it was really, really nice. These are all like individually picked out colors that person picked out for me, which I thought was very thoughtful. So since this is a gift and I haven't really used it a lot, and I do think that this palette is really pretty, and I also think that this might be a dupe for one of the shades in my Wooden Side collab palette. So yeah, I might want to do you guys want to see a video like duping my own palette since it's like discontinued now and you can't buy it? Maybe that could be kind of fun. I feel like this shade up here might be a contender, so I'm gonna hang on to this little palette. Next up is another palette from Menagerie Cosmetics, and this is one that is sadly discontinued now. What is even the name of this? This is the Courtship palette. This palette is so cute. This is like one of my favorite neutral palettes in my collection. I just think that the formulas in this are so beautiful. Like this shade here is one of my favorites in my collection. It's so beautiful. Let me do a little swatch here because I'm gonna try not to swatch too many things in this video, but like certain things just need to be swatched, and I feel like this just deserves to be swatched. It deserves to have its little moment in the spotlight. It's such a beautiful shade. It looks even better on the eyes. It's such a beautiful, beautiful duochrome, so I'm definitely going to keep this palette. And I know I said that palette was discontinued, but you can buy it as a single. They do sell most of their eyeshadows that are in their palettes as single shadows as well, if you don't want to pick up their full palettes. This little Huda Beauty Emerald Obsessions palette, I hung on to this last time I did my declutter, and I haven't used it since, so it's just gonna go. It's a beautiful palette, but I just don't use it, and now that I look at it, it's kind of similar to the one that I kept from We Makeup, so I'm just gonna let this one go. I'm gonna give this away because I just don't use it. This is a fairly new palette to my collection. This was sent to me from Standing O Cosmetics, and I think that the quality of this palette is really nice, but it also doesn't really inspire me that much. So maybe I will hang on to it just for a little bit longer because it does have some really nice shades in it, and I want to give myself one more chance just to see if I want to reach for this, especially on days where I'm not filming, because this is a mostly matte palette, and usually when I'm not filming, the way that I like to do my makeup is I prefer to pull for palettes for mattes, and then I will use some of my single shadows in my collection that are a little bit more special, like as my lid shades. So I feel like this would be a really nice like matte palette to do that with. So I am going to hang on to this for a little bit longer just to give it one more chance, because like I said, it is very new to my collection, and so far I've had a really good time with it, but with the packaging being so just minimal and boring, there is something to be said about having nice packaging, because I do find myself reaching for palettes with nicer packaging, if I'm being honest, just because of how many beautiful things I have in my collection, and I don't really consider this to be like a beautiful palette that I want to reach for. But color story is nice, formula is nice. I'm gonna give it one more chance. Next up here is a little palette from Nabla, and this is the Cutie palette. I don't know how I feel about this. I haven't used this very much, but I want to give it another chance. So I think I am going to hold on to it because I do think it's really, really pretty, and I just wanna get to know it a little bit better. So I'm gonna hang on to this. I might regret that. I might end up, in my next declutter being like, I never reached for it, but it's very small. It's not gonna take up a lot of space. So I'm gonna go ahead and hold on to this one as well. I'm not doing as good as I thought I was going to do, but looking around me, I'm seeing a lot of stuff that is going to get decluttered, so I don't feel too bad about keeping some of these things. But we'll see. So next up, here is a Glamlight palette. This is the Red Velvet Cupcake palette. I don't know if it's called like the mini palette or something like that. But I wanted to this is not the one I wanted to compare it to though. These are not very similar. These are both from Glamlight. I've gotten basically everything from Glamlight sent in PR except for like maybe 2 palettes, just FYI, so you know. Do I want to keep this? I feel like I just have so many similar color stories to this, and I don't find that any of these shades are particularly unique to my collection, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and declutter this. It's a really, really cute palette. I just don't really see myself reaching for something this monochromatic, and I just have so many pinks and reds and purples in my collection. So I'm actually gonna let this one go because I think this is going to be something that I can give away because it is quite new, and also I just think that a lot of people would probably love this more than I will. So I'm gonna give this to a better home. Next up here are 2 palettes from BH Cosmetics. These are both very, very old. This is the Color Festival palette. I haven't reached for this in over a year. I'm gonna let this one go. I'm also going to get rid of this one. This is the Weekend Festival palette. This is like the first one that they came out with in the series. I wish they continue these because these were really nice, but again, this is old now. I think I made a video with this, like one of the first videos on my channel, which is maybe 4 years ago. So yeah, this is just an old palette. I'm gonna let it go. I'm not using it. I'm also going to let this one go. This is the Sugar Crystals palette from Violet Voss. I had such a good time with this palette when I had it, and I did some really fun looks, but again, haven't reached for it in over a year. I think it is a beautiful palette, but I've just learned my makeup preferences a little bit more, and I feel like I am much more of a matte person than a shimmer person. I love my shimmers, but I want my shimmers to be special, and I don't find these shimmers to be as special and nice as what I would like these days, and I also just want a little bit more depth in this palette. This purple here doesn't go as deep as I would like, so I am going to let this one go because I also do have like better pastels and stuff in my collection as well. Oh, this palette from Glamlight, I am going to declutter, I think. It's just a very, like, look, I love color, but I like to have depth in my palette, and there's just no depth in this, and so I'm gonna get rid of this because I have so many palettes from Glamlight as well that I just like more than this, that I feel like has similar colors. And this color story honestly just doesn't really inspire me this much. I feel like it's just, I don't want to say all over the place, but it's kind of random. And even though it has some nice individual colors, I just don't see myself wanting to create looks with this color story. So I think I'm actually going to declutter this one. The quality is great. It's just I know myself and I know my preferences, and I just know that this is not a palette that I'm going to look at in the sea of palettes that are in front of me that are going to make me want to reach for this over anything else I have. So I'm actually going to get rid of this one as well. It is also a very new palette, but like I said, great quality, just it doesn't inspire me that much. Next is one from Linda Hallberg, and this is the Spectral palette. I didn't really love this palette. It was a very expensive palette, and I think, what do I really think of this? I don't think that the quality is that good. I think the mattes are fine, but the shimmers don't do it for me. This silver here is like, it's really pretty, but it's a very dry formula, and it's just like kind of not chunky, but it's kind of gritty, and I'm just not a fan of this, so I'm gonna let this one go. I think again someone else is going to get so much more use out of it than I would, and there's no reason for me to keep this. Next up we have an Udensai palette. Udensai is one of my absolute favorite brands, and I'm going to be keeping everything that I own from them because I love them. This is the Alwa 2 palette. The only thing that kind of draws this palette down for me is that it does have 2 pressed glitters, which I'm not a fan of, and I will probably declutter everything else in my collection that does have a pressed glitter because I just don't find myself reaching for palettes with pressed glitters. But I do make an exception for this palette because the other shades are just so good. These are some of the best bright pastel mattes I have in my collection, and I just love it. Like I love this palette. Okay, I don't know what else to say. I think this is great. Next up here is a palette from Lethal Cosmetics, and this is their After Dark collection. So I have a lot of palettes from Lethal, all of which I've gotten sent in PR. I really like Lethal as a brand. I wouldn't say that they have my favorite formula, but I think that they come out with some really unique and fun different color stories. So I am probably going to hold on to all of my Lethal palettes, also because all of their palettes, well, most of them anyway, except for some of their newest ones, are magnetic. So I could just depot this and like put it into my single shadow collection. And it also means that I can pick and choose the colors that I do want to keep if I do want to declutter down the line. But for now, I'm going to keep these palettes the way they are because I do think they're nice quality and I like Lethal as a brand, and I don't feel like it's time to part ways with them yet. Alright, next pile, we start off with another Glamlight palette, and this is the Chocolate Martini palette. This is another one that came in their Happy Hour collection. This is a really, really pretty neutral palette. I am going to hold on to this because I think this color story, for being a neutral palette, is quite inspiring and quite just fun, you know? Like, I don't find this to be boring, even though I'm not super into neutrals myself, but if it does have dark and deep neutrals like this, I can vibe with this. I think this is a really pretty palette, so I am going to hold on to this. I am of course going to hold on to the Hummingbird palette that was a collaboration with Udensai and Tina from the Fancy Face. This is a beautiful, beautiful palette. This color story is everything, and I think that the formulas in here are so nice. The shimmers are beautiful. Tina did an amazing job, and of course I'm going to keep this. I will be keeping this collection forever since I was a part of it, and I will show you that palette at some point in this video. But yeah, this is really, really pretty. Here's another one of the Glamlight palettes. This is the Dry Martini palette. I'm definitely going to keep this. This color story is beautiful. The shimmers are beautiful. The quality is really nice. No reason for me not to keep this. Plus, I just love green. Next up, we have two Menagerie palettes, one which was a collab palette between Menagerie and myself, and this is the Serenity palette. I am so proud of this baby, and I cannot believe that I've done 2 collabs this year. Like, that is mind-blowing to me, and I still cannot believe it. But here's what the palette looks like if you haven't already seen it. This is like So we started creating this palette like 2.5 years ago now, maybe even a little bit longer than that. This was me in a palette when I started designing this. And as time went on, I wouldn't say that my makeup preferences changed, but I do feel like maybe I would have done this a little bit differently if I were to like come up with a butterfly palette these days. But I'm still just so inspired by this color story. Like, I think I did, not to toot my own horn, but I think I did a really, really good job with this. I think this palette is so fun for being like a rainbow palette. I know people call it that. I don't feel like it's a rainbow palette myself, because you have to look at it like individually and like what's a matte and what's a shimmer. It would have been a rainbow palette more so if you had like all the colors in a rainbow in the mattes, but that's definitely not the case there. And I feel like the way that the mattes go with the shimmers make this not so much a rainbow palette. Anyway, why am I ranting about my own palette? I don't know, but I love this. I'm gonna keep it, obviously. And this is why I decided to make this into a two-parter, because otherwise we would be here for an hour and 45 minutes. I am pretty sure of that, so hope you guys are enjoying my rambling and that is not gonna be too long, but I like to chat, okay? So I'm gonna keep this palette, like duh. Another palette that I'm going to keep from Menagerie, this is the Flight Club palette. This is one of their newest palettes, and this is such a fun palette. Like, this is one of the reasons I didn't feel the need to keep that Red Velvet Cupcake palette from Glamlight, because I have purples and like reddish tones and stuff like that already in my collection, and I just love Menagerie's formula. Not that I don't like Glamlight's, but I don't know. I feel like I would reach for this a little bit more. I'm not saying they're super similar, but also just the packaging is the cutest thing in the world. Next up is a palette from Makeup and Murder, and this is the Crime Scene Volume 1 Paint Chips palette. This is their rainbow palette. I'm actually gonna declutter this. I do think that the quality is really nice, but I have not used this since my last declutter, so I just need to let go of things, and this is just, it's just not making the cut. Next up is the Oceanic palette from Ace Beauté. This is their older formula, but I never had any issues with their old formulas, so I'm gonna keep this. There's no reason for me not to. I think this color story is really nice. I will admit I have not used this since my last declutter, but I do feel like there are some very unique shades in here, and I'm going to keep it just for another year, just to see what happens, you know, because I can definitely see myself reaching for this, and I think the color story is beautiful. Oh man, this palette is so pretty. This is the El Barrio palette from Terra Moons Cosmetics. This is the only palette that they have ever made. I hope that they come out with new palettes, because I actually used this recently again, and it's just such a good palette. I love the red metallic shimmer in the middle. I love this color story. I think that they did a fantastic job, and this yellowy goldy shimmer up here is so pretty. So pretty. Definitely keeping this. So we have some Glamlight palettes coming up here, and this is one that I'm definitely going to keep. This is the Cake palette. This is one of my favorite palettes that Glamlight has ever done. I think this is one of my favorite rainbow palettes in my collection, and I don't feel like I need to have a ton of them, because I feel like I have almost everything that I would want in this, with the exception of maybe a couple of colors, but this is so beautiful, and I love this palette, and this is not going anywhere. This was one of my top palettes of 2020. I want to say it was like number 3 or something like that. I still love this palette. I think this palette is great. I also really do like this Ice Cream palette. Wait, is that what it's called? Ice Cream Dream palette from Glamlight. I think that this has some really, really fun tones in it. It's great for summer. I think that the pastels in here are really nice, and there are some very, I would say, unique shimmers to my collection. I don't have a lot of pastel shimmers, and I feel like this is maybe something that I am missing in other palettes, so I am gonna go ahead and hold on to this, even though it's not a palette that I would reach for a ton, because I don't use a lot of pastels and like really light, colorful shades, but I think the quality of this is really nice, and I love the packaging. Like, it's so fun. And speaking of pastels, this is the Pastel Dreams from Gimme Glow Cosmetics. This is one of my favorite pastel palettes in my collection. I think this is beautiful. I am definitely going to keep this, because as much as I don't use pastels, I like having them in my collection for the times where I want to use them. And when that time comes, this is definitely one of the palettes that I do reach for, so definitely going to keep this. Also going to be keeping the Lore palette from Alien Cosmetics. This ended up being my 3rd best palette of 2021. I can link my top 5 palettes up in the corner if you want to go check out those videos, because I did a look with all of my top 5 palettes of the year. So here is what the color story looks like. Alien Cosmetics has now rebranded to Unearthly Cosmetics, so just something to keep in mind if you can't like find a brand. That's why they had to change their names, I think for legal reasons, like copyright reasons. Not really sure. I'm not like an expert on this stuff, but I just wanted to let you know if this was maybe a palette or a brand that you'd be interested in if you haven't come across them before. But they have a beautiful formula. Their palettes are really, really fun. Great quality. Would highly recommend them. I'm going to keep this for sure. Another palette here that I'm definitely going to keep is the collab palette that Angelica did with Kaleidos, and this is the Club Nebula palette. This palette is a dream, honestly. This ended up being my second best palette of 2021. Yeah, this ended up in my number 2 spot, and I think that this palette is just, it's perfect, honestly. I love it. Another palette here that I've honestly gotten more use out of than I thought I would, because for someone who doesn't really like neutrals, these are the kind of neutrals that I feel like I can kind of have some fun with. Like I think that because this palette goes so deep and so dark, I love using these mattes along with like really fun pops of color shimmers, and I think that it really enhances the shimmers. Like these two colors together are so beautiful in the crease. They make like for the most beautiful just like caramelly brown dark chocolatey kind of look, and I love that. This is the Sweet and Sticky palette from Give Me Glow. Would definitely recommend this if you've been looking for a like fun but still neutral palette that's very easy to work with, good quality. The shimmers are really nice as well, but I'm not really like into neutral shimmers as much as I am neutral mattes. So I actually really enjoy this palette, and I'm definitely going to keep it. Next up here is a palette from the Pastel Roses UK. This is quite a new palette in my collection. This was their Halloween palette, so this is no longer available, sadly, but this color story is so nice, and the quality is really beautiful. Oh, the shimmers from the Pastel Roses are just amazing, so I'm definitely going to keep this. I love this palette. I feel like I'm keeping a lot of palettes in this pile. I thought I was going to do better. Let's move on. So this is the Berlin 89 palette from Lethal Cosmetics. Again, another Lethal Cosmetics palette that I am going to keep. This has a beautiful multi-chrome in it. Not the most intense multi-chrome. You can definitely find like more intense ones in single shadows, but I think for being in a palette, this is really nice. I think the color story is nice. I love the theming behind this, and again, I like Lethal as a brand, so I am going to hold on to this one. I am also going to keep this one from Glamlight. This is the Wine palette. This is another one of the palettes that was in the Happy Hour collection, and I think that these are beautiful tones. Like, do I need this when I have the Flight Club palette from Menagerie? They're pretty similar, but I don't know. There's something about this palette that I really enjoy, so I'm gonna go ahead and hold on to this one as well. And I am also going to be keeping these two palettes from Made by Mitchell. These I have not gotten around to using in quite some time, but I do remember having the best time ever when I did do my videos with these like last year, or maybe the year before. I guess I'm posting this in January. I'm filming this in December, so just so you know. But yeah, I had a really good time when I used these, and I would like to go back to them one more time just to see if I still feel the way that I felt when I used them the first time, because his newest palette just wasn't that great. So yeah, I'm curious to see like how I feel about this formula after not having used it for quite some time, but the color stories are just so good, and I love how chaotic they are because I am a very chaotic person myself. So I enjoyed that. So let's just talk about his new palette as well. I'm gonna declutter this one because I did not like the formula on this. There was just something that I just didn't get along with this one. And even though I think the color story is fun, I don't know. I just wasn't really impressed. I found the mattes to be sheerer than in his first two palettes. And I also just had some issues with some of these shimmers. I just found them to be very sort of waxy and sticky and crumbly, and they just didn't really look that great. So I'm gonna declutter this one, and I'm going to keep his two older palettes because I also just like these color stories a little bit more. Moving on, we're making some progress. Let's talk about some palettes from Game Beauty. So this is the Fantasy palette. This is quite a new brand. They have sent me all of these in PR. I think that the execution of their palettes, packaging wise, is on point. I don't love their formula, I'll be completely honest. I have never really been like super impressed by their formula. Some of their palettes are better than others, and I will tell you about that when we get to them, but this is just not really a palette that I don't know, this color story just isn't my thing. I think that's what it comes down to. I think that there are just too many light shades in this. The pastels didn't have as much punch as some of the other pastels in my collection. And I'm never really blown away by the shimmers from this brand either, so I don't know. this palette just isn't really doing it for me, so I think I'm actually gonna let this one go. Even though, like I said, it's a new brand, and for like YouTube reasons, I would like to have their palettes in my collection just to kind of compare them, and maybe that's what I'll do. I'll keep this for YouTube purposes because I do feel like this is a brand that is really listening to feedback and they're trying to improve, and for that reason I want to be able to down the line compare and just to see where they started to where they are in the future, because I do think that they have so much potential and I do think that they are going to keep improving. And because I find this to be one of their worst palettes per se, I'm going to keep this just because I want to see what else they can do. This is the Adventure palette, also from Game Beauty, and I think I'm actually going to go ahead and declutter this just because this one has a pressed glitter in it, and I'm just not a fan of pressed glitters. It does have a really beautiful shimmer down here, but I'm just not going to reach into this palette for that shimmer because I have a ton of shimmers that are basically the same color that I like just as much, if not more. So sadly, I think I'm going to let this one go. It's so hard for me because the completionist in me kind of want to collect these palettes because I think they're really pretty and they're very small and they don't take up a lot of space. But the practical side of me is like, Annette, you don't need this. You're never going to use it. So I'm gonna let this baby go, even though I really want to keep it, but I'm going to be good. I'm going to let this go. This palette, on the other hand, is definitely staying. This is the You Beauty palette from Glaminatrix Cosmetics. This palette is so pretty. I'm trying to get it open. It's a very strong magnet. But this palette is stunning. It has a beautiful multi-chrome down here. There are some really, really pretty duochromes in here, and the color story, it's really nice. It's a little bit on the fragile side, so I would recommend, if you plan on getting this or you have this, to be careful with it because the shadows are, like I said, quite fragile and they can break pretty easily. But yeah, I think the quality of this otherwise is really nice. Glaminatrix is a great brand. I'm definitely going to hang on to this one. Next up here is a collab palette with Copacetic Cosmetics and M. Jones on Instagram. She is my friend, so I am going to keep this. And this is just such a cute palette. It's called the Companion palette. It is an all shimmer palette, so the name is very fitting. And even though some of the shades and the formulas from Copacetic isn't my personal favorites, they have some kind of flaky shades that I just don't really get along with. But because this was made by Monica, and like I said, she is my friend, I'm definitely going to keep this palette because it also just is so cute. We're getting into some stuff that is probably getting decluttered here, and I have 3 palettes from Pinky Rose Cosmetics, and when these first came out, I was so excited about these because the color stories were, I feel like, very ahead of their time. I hadn't really seen anything else like this at the time that came out. So this is the Exotic Peacock palette. I think this is beautiful, but honestly, I haven't heard anything at all from this brand in the past 2 years. So I'm going to declutter these palettes, not only because they are quite, they're not like old, but they're like 3 years old. And because of how many things I get into my collection, I just know for myself that I'm not going to reach for something that's this old. And also their shimmer formula is not my favorite. They do have some really nice mattes though, but yeah, I'm going to get rid of these because I don't even know what the deal with the brand is anymore. And I feel like that's going to happen with a lot of the other palettes in my collection as well. Like some of these other indie brands have just kind of fallen off the face of the earth and I don't know where they are, and I don't need to have them in my collection anymore. So I'm gonna get rid of all of these. They are really, really pretty, and I think that you can still buy them if you wanted to. So if these are interesting, I definitely wouldn't steer you away from them, but I don't know what's going on with the brand these days. Next up is a palette from Bruja Beauty, and they did send me this palette, and I think that the quality of the mattes is nice, but I don't know, I just don't need another rainbow palette. So I'm gonna go ahead and let this one go. I also don't like the shimmers in this. I think they're very blah and just not exciting in the slightest. So gonna let this go, but the quality of the mattes was really nice. I have 2 of the Alter Ego palettes here. This is the Sahara palette, and this is quite a neutral palette. I think it's really pretty. This is a dupe for the Natasha Denona bronze palette. Is that right? I'm not really sure. I don't own that one, but this is just a little bit too neutral for what I like in my palette. So even though the quality is nice, I did get all of these sent in PR, by the way, which is why it's like a little bit easier for me to declutter them, because these are palettes that I wouldn't have bought myself, but that I accepted to, you know, get for review purposes, and I feel like I've sort of done my job with them. So I am going to let this one go, and this is the Aurora palette, and again, It's quite a neutral palette. This one is a little bit more colorful. This is a dupe for the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. And I think this is nice, but again, just not really a color story that I find myself reaching for very often, so I am going to let this one go as well. This is one of my newest palettes in my collection, and this is the Bad Witch Club palette from Gimme Glow Cosmetics. I am going to keep this. I think this palette is beautiful. It has some really fun tones in here that I don't think I have in a lot of other palettes, especially like this tealy greeny blue up here. Super unique. And also this periwinkle, like blurply shade. I know people hate when I say that, but I think this is really beautiful and the quality is really nice. So I'm definitely going to hold on to this one. I am also, of course, going to hold on to the Red Dragon palette that Judy did with the Unsai. This is just such a beautiful neutral palette if I've ever seen one. I think this is really nice. And also because, like I said before, I was part of this collection. I'm not going to be decluttering anything from this collection, even though this color story, again, is not something that I'm going to be reaching for a lot, but I'm so proud of Judy. And I love Unsai quality. I love how just sleek and easy to store all of their palettes are, because it makes me want to keep them. Like just to display and just to have like a collection of them, because they all just go so nicely together. So definitely gonna hold on to that one. I'm also going to be keeping this one out. This is a highlighting palette. Why is this here? I was looking for that the other day. I was like, no wonder I couldn't find it. But anyway, it's just a highlighting palette. I'm gonna keep it. This is the Sol Mona highlighting palette. I think this is really, really nice. I'm gonna put this in with my highlighters where it belongs. This is one of my favorite pastel palettes in my collections, and this is from Shroud Cosmetics. They used to be called Strobe Cosmetics, which is why the name is different, but here's what the palette looks like. These pastel mattes are incredible. Again, I don't use pastels a lot, but I do like having them in my collection for the times where I do, so I'm for sure going to keep this. I'm also going to be keeping my Natasha Denona Metropolis palette because this palette is stunning. Quality is amazing. I have nothing bad to say about this except that I find it to be a little bit repetitive, but also, I get why it is the way it is, because even though some of the colors look similar, they're different formulas. So, like, it makes sense, and I'm absolutely going to keep this because I think this is amazing. This palette, I think I'm going to declutter now. I've held on to this for like 2 years now, mostly just because I love the color story and because some of the shimmers in here are just so jewel worthy, but I also just haven't reached for it because I have so many beautiful single shadows in my collection, and those are the ones that I find myself reaching for over shimmers and palettes. I don't know why, it's just how it is, but this is the Prodigy palette from Sample Beauty. I mean, the color story is just so fun. Like, it's very dark and deep and jewel toned, which is why it's called a jewel something palette, but it makes sense. And that is why I bought it. I bought it because of the color story. I don't love the mattes in here. I find them to be a little bit sheer, not the most buildable, but the shimmers are just so beautiful. And it's hard for me to get rid of, but like I said, I have so many beautiful shimmers in my collection that I don't need this. This one I am also going to keep. This is the Jaclyn Hill Volume 2 palette. I think this palette is really nice. Like, when I want to have these tones, I definitely reach into this palette. I think that the warm tones and the purples and the reds and the yellows are really, really nice. I don't really touch the neutrals in here, but the rest of this palette is really good quality. And I'm not usually a fan of Morphe, but I gotta say, they did a pretty good job with this one. We have more palettes. Guess what? We're not even halfway done yet. Oh my god. This is ending up a way longer video than I was expecting, but that's okay. Next up we have the Elva palette from Unsai, and no, this is not the one that got discontinued. They've discontinued one of their earlier palettes, but this is not one of them. This one is still available. Not really a color story that I use a ton, but I love Unsai as a brand. I love their formula. I'm going to keep this. Again, packaging is just A+. There's no reason for me to want to declutter anything from Unsai because, like I said before, everything is just so pretty and I want to have like the full collection. I'm not usually a completionist, I promise, but there's something about Unsai as a brand that I just really enjoy. This is the Caliente palette from Glamlight, and I got this in a subscription box and I haven't used it, so I'm just gonna give it away because when I got this palette was old news, and as a YouTuber who mostly reviews eyeshadows, getting an old palette into my collection and then trying to review it and expecting views, it's just not gonna happen. So I'm gonna go ahead and just give this away to someone who is probably going to use it because I'm sure this is amazing quality since it is from Glamlight. Love them as a brand, but I just know for myself I'm not gonna use this. This one I think I'm going to declutter. This is the e.l.f. and Jay Kissa collab. I did do a video with this, and honestly, I just didn't get along with the mattes. I didn't think the matte formula in here was very good. Some of the shimmers are really nice, but I just don't gravitate to this palette, and I mostly bought it for a review, and I don't know where J. Kissa has been lately. I haven't seen much content from her, so I don't know. I'm just gonna go ahead and get rid of this one because I can't see myself really using it. Here is a palette from Colourpop, and this is the Tinkerbell palette. I don't know if that's what it's called, but that's the collab they did with Tinkerbell anyway. I think that the quality of this palette is really nice, but the color story is not... I just had a hard time coming up with looks with this, and I just didn't really feel like it was that versatile. I wish there was like a darker shade to go with these like more pinky tones and neutrals, and I don't know. This was just a little confusing to me. Am I going to keep it? It's beautiful. It is from Colourpop. These are magnetic. No, I'm gonna declutter it because I just know myself and I know I'm not gonna use it again. But I think this is one of their probably best releases of 2021. I mean, the packaging is just so cute, and I know a lot of people really enjoy this color story, and I'm happy I bought it, but I just realized that the color story isn't really for me. Next up here are two palettes from Didi's Signature. This was the first one that she sent me when I first discovered the brand, and I honestly fell in love with the formula. I think that her formula is so nice, but this palette does have a pressed glitter in here for that reason alone, and because I just don't like the packaging. This is annoying, I'm sorry, but thankfully she's moved away from this packaging, and she has some really beautiful palettes that she's come out with lately and that I just like way more. So I am going to declutter this one. This is the apple palette, red apple palette, and this is the reformulated, or she took out the pressed glitters that were in the original strawberry palette, and she made a palette that doesn't have any pressed glitters in it. Honestly, this palette is nice, but I don't find the need to really keep it because I have other palettes from Didi's that I like more, and also this shimmer is not at all what she can do. She just has much better shimmers in her new palettes that I'm not gonna reach for this. And like I said again, the packaging is just kind of annoying. This palette I'm going to declutter. I did buy this because I thought that the color story in here was very fun for being a neutral palette, and I wanted to review it because it was a new brand. This is from a brand called Our Darling. But again, like I said with the Standing O Cosmetics palette, this front with just the name of the brand on the outside is just not doing it for me. I get it. This was probably their first palette, but just do more, you know? I don't want to be picky, but if you want to stand out in this industry, this is just not going to do it. So I'm going to declutter this, even though I thought the quality was nice, but I just have prettier things that I'm going to reach for more. Let's see. This is the Glamlight Pie palette. Is that what it's called? It's pie something. Anyway, let's take a look. Okay, so I think I'm going to declutter this one just because I find that Glamlight comes out with so many palettes that basically has the same color story. How many palettes like this do we need from Glamlight? Yes, the quality is great. Yes, I love the packaging. I think it's very cute, but I have this from Glamlight already. I don't need more, so even though I like this palette, I'm gonna declutter it because I don't need to hold on to every single Glamlight palette that has pinks and purples and mauve tones in it because there's just a lot of them. I have two palettes here from 50/50 Makeup. I really do like their formula, and I like them as a brand. This is a Dutch-based brand or German brand. I think they're from the Netherlands. And I really do like their form. I could be wrong though. I don't want to be spreading misinformation here, but they are a European brand. I should know this, but give me some slack. There's a lot of brands in here. Anyway, I like the color stories, I like the formulas, but I don't think I like them enough to keep them. So I think I am going to probably declutter both of these, even though, like I said, they are nice palettes, but I just don't find myself really wanting to play with them. So I'm just gonna make room for more exciting stuff. Okay, next up is the Elysian palette from Copacetic, and this was a collab between them and Basket Case Beauty. And I think that the color story of this is really nice, but again, I just don't really get along with Copacetic's formula. So I am going to get rid of this. I am not as close with Basket Case Beauty as I am with Monica, which did the other collab with Copacetic. So I think I'm going to declutter this because it's just not really, I don't know, it's just not really doing it for me. So Unfortunately, I think that they did a really good job with this color story, and I'm very proud of her for doing this collab. But this is just a personal preference thing, and I don't want to keep too many things that I know I'm not going to use. Let's see. Next up is another palette from Shroud Cosmetics, one they used to be called Strobe, and this is the Divinity palette. I'm gonna let this one go. I haven't used this in like 2 years, and I just don't get that inspired by the color story, even though the quality is great. Just know I'm not going to use it. I'm also going to be decluttering this one from Makeup and Murder. I just haven't used this since my last declutter. This is a beautiful neutral palette that I actually really enjoy, but I just don't see myself reaching for a lot. I have other neutral palettes that I like more, but I do think this is really nice, and if you're looking for a nice neutral palette with a good color story like this that goes from very light to very dark, has some beautiful shimmers, I think you would like this. But like I said, I just have so much eyeshadow that some things are just gonna have to go. Here we have the paint palette from Ringlight. This is the original. I thought they came out with 2. I'm not sure. I thought this was the second one, but apparently it's not. But like this is what I'm saying. Like Ringlight comes out with so many things that all look very, very similar that I just don't need to keep all of them. But I am going to keep this even if I have the cake palette. I do feel like these tones are actually quite different, and the shimmers in here are spectacular. So I am going to hold on to this because I think this is really fun and really nice quality. Next up is one of my favorite palettes in my collection, even though I hate the packaging with a passion. I think this is so annoying, but this is the Worldy palette by P. Louise. I have done so many looks with this palette. I filmed a 10 look video with this, and I've also just used this off camera so many times. I think it is beautiful. I don't like the shimmers in here, but good thing there's only 3 of them because the mattes in here are definitely the star of the show. They're so easy to work with, so pigmented, so blendable, so just easy, effortless. I know that I can, build these on top of each other, not have it get patchy. I love this palette. I think it is great. So we're moving into some palettes here that I do feel like will probably get decluttered. So I have a palette here from Lime Crime. This is one of their capsule palettes, and as much as I enjoyed this and I thought the formulas were really nice, I haven't reached for it since I filmed my video with it, and it's been like a year. And I just also realized that I'm not a fan of palettes that have like face products in them. Like I know I could use this blush as an eyeshadow, obviously, but if I'm gonna use this palette as a blush, I'm never gonna reach for it. So I'm just not gonna use this blush unless I reach for this palette as eyeshadows, and I just don't think that I will. I don't know. I think the quality is nice, but I just don't find myself wanting to use it, so I'm gonna declutter it. I'm also probably going to be decluttering all of my ABH palettes because I don't know. The color stories just don't really do it for me. I mean, it's pretty. This is the Rephr palette, but haven't used it since I made my 10 look video with this, and so I just don't feel the need to keep it. This is the Alyssa Edwards palette. I did get this sent as a subscriber gift. Thank you so much to you who sent me this. I really do cherish that and appreciate it. But sadly, I've only used this palette twice, and that's just not really enough for me to want to keep it. I think the quality is nice. It's just the color story, I don't know. I just don't find myself wanting to use it. I think I'm going to declutter this one as well. This is the Block Party palette from Suva Beauty. I do think this color story is nice. I had a good time with it when I used it, but I haven't used it in a year and a half, so it's gonna have to go. So this is the Wired palette from Urban Decay, and this was the first palette that I got sent in PR from them, and I can't exactly say that I gave it a good review. So I was very surprised when they ended up sending me their Wild West palette as well, just because of this review, but I appreciate that from brands that they can take feedback. But I didn't like this palette. I'm gonna get rid of it, even though super cool to have gotten PR from Urban Decay, but I'm not gonna keep it just for that reason. The Subculture palette from ABH is just old by now. This is probably 4 years. I don't even know. I'm gonna get rid of it. I've just had it for so long. The Radioactive palette from not Urban Decay, Melt Cosmetics. I just have other rainbow palettes in my collection that I like more. I'm gonna get rid of this one as well. And speaking of the Urban Decay Wild West palette, I'm going to declutter this one as well because this color story is kind of boring for me. It's not something that I am ever going to reach for. Even though I thought the quality was nice, I'm never blown away by Urban Decay's eyeshadows, and I get that they're not trying to be like super out there and crazy, but I wish they could just do a little bit extra with their palettes. I just find them kind of bland, but I know that's the market that they're trying to reach. I know that they want to, you know, get out there to the everyday consumer who doesn't wear crazy makeup like myself. Like, I get it, but I wish that Urban Decay was a brand for me, but I just don't think they are. So that one is gonna go. So let's do this pile before I go over to part 2 of this, because otherwise we'll be here forever. Next up is a palette from Wet n Wild. This was sent to me in PR. This is the Saved by the Bell collaboration. Let's see if I can open this. See, I hate, oh my god, I really, really hate Wet n Wild's packaging. It's so annoying. Anyway, this palette has pressed glitters in it. I'm gonna let it go. I'm not a fan of this plastic packaging. It's just, it makes it so cheap and it makes me not want to use it. Is that petty? Maybe, but I'm gonna let this one go. Next up here is a palette from Muse Beauty, which is now called Kylab, and this is the Triumph of Venus palette. This palette is really, really pretty. I am going to hold on to this. I've said this before, I wish that they wouldn't have switched to this kind of box packaging because it is kind of annoying. It's like you try to close it and it doesn't always want to like close properly. It did now, but like sometimes it'll get stuck like this and it's like, come on. It's kind of annoying, but I really like their formula and I like their color stories. This one, however, I think I'm actually going to declutter because this color story is probably the least favorite that they've ever done. This is the Honoré palette and it's just a little too soft and pretty and subtle for my liking. Like, yeah, there's a blue in here, but if you take away the blue, like, this is just not me. So I'm actually gonna go ahead and declutter this one. Here's another one from the same brand, which is the Van Gogh palette. This is my favorite color story that they've come out with recently. It's still not my favorite palette from them, but I do really enjoy this, so I am going to hold on to it. Next up here is a palette from Enchanted Luster Cosmetics, which is a Australian indie brand. It did have like a sticker thing on the packaging that I tore off because it was coming off on its own. They have now changed the packaging on their palettes, which I do appreciate, but this is the Dragon Prism 2 palette. It is a all multi-chrome goodness palette. I love this palette. This ended up being my second best palette of 2020? Yeah, 2020. I've still used this palette many, many times. I think that the formulas in here are really, really nice, and it's just a fun palette to play with along with like some of my other palettes that have more mattes in it, and these are the kind of like special shimmers that I reach for. Like this palette along with some of my other all shimmer palettes as well as my single shadows are what I like to use along with mattes and palettes. So I'm definitely going to keep that one. Here is a palette from Lethal. This is the, I don't even know. Wait, oh, that is so funny. These are my test shadows that I got from Menagerie that was sent to me to test out before we actually like made the palette, and I put them in here. I was like, wait, what is this palette? That makes so much sense. So these were the shades that I like tested before I approved the collab palette that I did. That is funny. I didn't know they were in there. Okay, we have some alien / unearthly cosmetics here, and this is the, what are you called? Strawberry Popsicle palette or something like that. Here is what the colors look like. I think this is super fun. I'm definitely going to keep it. I don't think I'll be decluttering anything from this brand because I love everything they come out with. This is the Witching Hour palette. This is probably their newest palette. Well, the newest palette in my collection anyway. I know they've come out with a couple of new ones in their new collection, but I don't have those. But I love this palette. I do wish that they would... Here's the thing. I think I like their old formulas more when they had the round pans because I find that these are just a little bit harder pressed, and I don't love the shimmers in this one as much as some of the shimmers in their older palettes. So I kind of wish that they would bring back some of the other shimmers that I just like a little bit more, because especially like this orange down here, very hard pressed into the pen, kind of hard to get out with a brush. These two are a little bit on the sheer side, which I don't mind, but they're just not my favorite shimmer formula, but the mattes are beautiful and the color story is really nice. So I am going to keep it still. Let's see, this is one that I'm torn on. This is the Violet Ink palette from Menagerie Cosmetics. Can you tell that I've been filming for a while? I'm like stumbling over my words so badly. But this is a beautiful purple palette, but I just don't reach for these tones of purple. I like more the sort of leading pink tones and like the more brighter purples over these kind of purples. So, oh, this is so hard. Am I going to be decluttering my first Menagerie palette? No, I don't think I can. I think I need to keep it. I think I need to keep it because it's so small. It's just, I can't, okay? I'm doing good. I need to keep that one. Next up is the collaboration palette between Lethal Cosmetics and Teresa is Dead, and this is the Lethal is Dead palette. I'm of course going to keep this because I love Teresa. Like I said before, I really like Lethal as a brand. I think they have really cool color stories, and yeah, I'm definitely gonna hold on to this one because I think that they both did a really, really good job. Next up, we have a palette from ColourPop, and this is the At Forest Sight palette that Raw Beauty Christie did with them. I love this palette. I think it is so pretty. It's such good quality. I'm definitely going to keep it. This is probably my favorite ColourPop palette of all time. I don't have a ton of ColourPop. I do like their formula, but they just come out with so much that for being a review channel that reviews eyeshadows, by the time I have made my order, they've come out with like 2 new collections. So I just can't. Like, unless I somehow get on ColourPop's PR list, I probably will not be, reviewing a lot of ColourPop, but I do really like them as a brand. So I'm definitely going to hold on to this palette because it is really, really pretty. Next here is the Victory palette from Game Beauty. This is by far my favorite palette that they have come out with. I think that this is the best formula that they've ever done. I didn't have any problems with this. I thought it performed really nicely. Some of the shimmers in here are beautiful. Some of the mattes are maybe a little bit too similar for my liking, but I still think that this is their best palette to date, and for that reason, I'm definitely going to keep it. I am also going to keep my Vivid Rose palette from Give Me Glow. Not really a color story that I reach for a lot, but I do think these tones are really pretty, and I do like having it in my collection. Is it finally time to retire my Taco palette from Glamlight? I've had so much fun with this palette, but I also have not reached for it in over a year. So I think it's going to be time to declutter this one. I never thought I would say this because this ended up being one of my top palettes in 2019 or something like that. I love this palette. I think it is so fun. Love the color story. But there's something about old palettes that, when you keep getting in new palettes into your collection, it's like the new and exciting thing. So I find myself wanting to use newer palettes way more so than the ones that are like getting to be older than a year. Because I don't know, there's something about like the honeymoon phase with palettes, you know what I mean? I'm sure some of you know what I mean. Like, it's exciting, you get a new palette into your collection and you just want to use it. And so some of the older palettes that I used to really, really love I just kind of forget about them, which is sad, but it's just the way it is. And I think I am finally going to get rid of my Taco palette, even though it's beautiful, quality is great. I'm just not in that honeymoon phase anymore, so this is gonna go. This one, however, love this palette. This is the Wilderness palette from Beauty Bay. This color story is amazing. This ended up being my number 5th best palette of 2021. I love this. I mean, I really have no complaints. I think this is a fantastic palette. So that's gonna be it for part 1 of this declutter video. Part 2 will be coming soon. If part 2 is up, I will link it up in the corner and down in my description box if you are watching this a little bit later after this is posted. But if not, just know that it is coming. I hope you enjoy this. If you are new to my channel, you want to see more eyeshadow content, which is basically what I do here, don't forget to subscribe, and hopefully I will see you all in my next video. Bye.